Hello, and my name is Oscar Terrazas, and you can look me up at www.terrazasministries.com. That's T as in Texas, E-R-R-A-Z-A-S. If you want to look up my other studies on YouTube, just put my full name in the search. It would be Oscar John Terrazas. Well, I pray you get a blessing out of this. And we are going to cover today Nephilim and the giants. And just to start this off, I want you to know that more than likely I'm going to bring up more questions than answers. And I will cover all aspects of it, not only the biblical, but also the archeology of the discovery of giants, and then insert the possibility of Nephilim operating in the world today. I do not believe in aliens from outer space. But as we will see in the presentation, I will present what I believe as far as the Nephilim. So let's get on with it. I invite your comments. Go to my website, send me an email, and we'll be more than happy to discuss this or any of my other presentations. Nephilim and the giants and the men of renown. Well, first off, spiritual creations of heaven. If you want, look at my other study on spirits of the Bible and see the different creations. But basically, angels always appeared as men. They did not have wings. They carried a message, and so they were basically the messengers of God, as the word denotes. Seraphim, now they had wings and faces and were around the throne of God, and they're mentioned in the book of Isaiah. And we know that there were creatures that were there. Also cherubim. Now cherubim did have wings, and they had godlike powers, and they defended places, and they had great powers. And by the way, Satan was a cherubim, which I will also cover. Now I believe that the demonic creatures operating today is actually fallen angels. They were actually fallen cherubims, not aliens. Now, many times in the scriptures, you will find that the word angel is used, but it's used in a generic term. But we have these divisions of other creatures. Lucifer, Satan, was a cherubim. Apollyon was also an angelic cherubim creature that comes out of the book of Revelation, chapter 9. And in chapter 12, we read, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceived the whole world. He was cast out onto the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." So were these angels, generically speaking, or were they cherubims that had the great power? So now the verses we're going to deal with in the sons of God would be Genesis 6:2. That seems to be the focus of this and its interpretation. That the sons of God, sons mean Hebrew ben, and God here is Elohim, saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives, all of which they chose. Job 1:6, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them." Job 38, "When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy." By the way, as a side note, angels do not sing. So here we have then this angelic creature, this cherubim, and many others like him that rebelled against God. Now I want to introduce another word here that was brought up in the book of Daniel, which I'll bring up also later as prophecy, and the word watchers. Daniel 4:13, "I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher, and a holy one came down from heaven." Now here, the Hebrew word is ir, ear. It was some type of angel or guardian being. But it's repeated again in Daniel 4. "This matter is by decree of the watchers, and the man of the word of the holy ones." Verse 23. "And whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one come down from heaven." In other words, the king, who was a Gentile, seemed to have the ability to see a watcher. And the watcher manifested himself before the king. So you remember the story of the 4 Hebrew boys, and then all of a sudden one like unto the Son of God appeared? Well, I want to change your view or your vision of things a little bit as I introduce these ideas. So just very well be that that other one among the furnace could have been a watcher. Not a pre-manifestation of Jesus Christ, but a watcher. So who were the giants? As we get into this interpretation, there were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came on to the daughters of men, they bare children unto them, and they became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Well, here is where the discussion lies, and the word there for giants. The original Hebrew word is Nephil. As many times in various times in the Bible, many times the translators left the original Hebrew word, and the reason they left it is for you to interpret what it was. So the King James Version translates Nephil, meaning bully or tyrant, that it was a giant. That's the way they translate it. Or it could have been a men of renown, meaning men of great stature, like the President of the United States and kings and queens. They are and have great reputations. Or, as the controversy goes on, were they of great size? Were they giants in the sense that we think giant as the redwood trees? Giants as 12-foot, 20-foot, 30-foot types of giants. And this is the discussion of this study today. Note also the different translations of Genesis 6:4. In the Spanish, in the Reina Valera, it says, había gigantes en la tierra en aquellos días. So here, the Spanish translated also as giants. But the English Standard Version leaves the original Hebrew and says the Nephilim. The American Standard Version leaves the original Hebrew, the Nephilim. The New Living Translation states it this way: in those days, for some time thereafter, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. So there is a discussion then among theologians as to what it should be translated. So let's look at the Bible first and note that there were giants. In Genesis 14, and in the 14th year came Chalomander, then the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephanims in Ashtoreth. Notice Ashtoreth. And Zamims in Ham, and Emims in Shaveh, Kirathaim. So here the Hebrew word for Rapha or Rapha and the Rephanims means giant. And the Hebrew word Zamim means prominent. And the Hebrew word then Emims means terror. So they were giant, prominent, terrible type people that lived in various parts of these lands of the Bible. The Anakims in Deuteronomy 9:1. Hear, O Israel, thou art to pass over Jordan this day, and to go to possess nations greater and mightier than thyself, cities great and fenced up to heaven, people great and tall, the children of the Anakims. Joshua 15, and Caleb drove out hence the three sons of Anak, Shai, Iman, Talmai, and the children of Anak. So here they were noted that they were great and tall. Well, how great and tall? When we know from Numbers 13, it says, nevertheless the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover we saw the children of Anak there. Now here the Hebrew word is Aquo, or from the tribe of Canaan. We know about the Canaanites. And is repeated again in Numbers 13:33 and says, we saw the giants. And the Hebrew word there is Nephil, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, the Nephil. And we were on our side as grasshoppers. Well, did the Hebrews then look at these people and say, wow, they're just great, terrific people. They are have a reputation. Or were they really as grasshoppers? In other words, were they much smaller than those men? And we note then from history and archaeology that in those times man averaged somewhere around 5'5" or less. So were they 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot? And that's the question that we're going to get into in this particular study. There was more than one tribe. Deuteronomy 2 does mention the Emims, which were many, great, and tall among the Anakims. And the Moabites called them Emims. And also Deuteronomy 2 says, thou comest over against the children of Ammon, or the Ammonites. And verse 20 of chapter 2 says, And that also was counted a land of the giants. Giants dwelt there in the old time. And the Ammonites called them Zamumims. So we got all these words and all these tribes referring to giant people. None of the other tribes, just these. And there was a king of the giants. We know from Deuteronomy 3 that the king of Og dwelt there, and he was known as a remnant of the giants. And another introductory note here, a little insert, is the Bible does not mention women giants, only men giants. It does not mention a queen of Og or a wife of any of the other giants. It only mentions men that came upon the scene that were constantly in wars and battles. And I'm going to get into that just a little bit. So in 2 Samuel 21 it says, Ashibbanab was the sons of the giants. Here the word is Rapha. The weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass. That's about 100 pounds. So this particular man had the ability to throw a spear that was 100 pounds. 2 Samuel 21 again, it says, and there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbachai and the Hushanites slew Soph, which was the sons of the giant. Again, the Hebrew word Rapha. Where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Now again, here the words are great stature. So we're not dealing about renown. Now what's more specific in the Hebrew is there was a man who was very, very tall. Another strange thing. They had then 6 digits on each hand and 6 digits on each foot. We know that they were named, and one of the famous ones, of course, was Goliath of the Philistines. It says his height was 6 cubits and a span, and I'm going to get into that. There was also a war with the Philistines, and Elhanan, the son of Jair, slew Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, whose spear staff was like a weaver's beam. So the spear staff in this case is about 37 pounds. Note also that Goliath had brothers, 4 of them in fact, and that's where many pull the story of then David carrying 5 stones in his sacks in case his other brothers came to defend Goliath. Now here's an interesting verse. And again, are we talking about men of great reputation, or are we talking about height? Amos 2:9 says, yet destroyed I the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of cedars, and he was strong as oaks, and yet I destroyed his fruit from above. So here we have a description of a man who was the height of cedars. Now cedars were anywhere from 25 to up to 40 feet tall in the land in that time. So were there really giants? Were there really then men who were 25, 30 feet tall? Never mind Goliath, which I'm going to get into in the next slide. So how big were the Nephilim? Well, a Roman cubit was 17 inches compared to our measurement. And an Egyptian cubit was 20.5 inches. We know that from archaeological discoveries in which they actually discovered a piece of granite that was believed that was used as a measuring tool in order to cut the blocks of the pyramids. So if we use the Egyptian measurement of cubit, that would make Goliath about a little over 10 feet tall. Now it says that King Og, his bed was 4 cubits the breadth thereof, and 9 cubits the length thereof. And so if you multiply that out, that means that Og's bed was 17 feet long. So either he was a midget in his bed, or he filled the bed, which more than likely would mean that King Og was 15 feet tall. By the way, that would make Goliath a teenager. Now we get into another interesting aspect. And I'm going to point this out, and I don't know if you've ever seen it this way, but let me point it out. The seed of man. Genesis 4 says, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God saith, he has appointed me another seed instead of Abel. Let's look at also Genesis 9:8. And God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, "And I, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you." Now, why would the Bible now begin to speak about genealogy and bloodline and seed? So if you look at my presentation on the bloodline of Jesus, you will know just how mixed up the bloodline of Israel was, and even the bloodline of Jesus Christ. But here then we talk about the seed of then Seth and the seed of Noah. So who were the sons? Genesis 6 again. "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, the daughters of men were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose." Now here the Hebrew word for wives is Isha, and is translated as wives 429 times. But it is also translated as woman 323 times. So let me reread that a little bit for those that believe that there were Nephilim in the land. "They were fair, and they took them women of all which they chose." Now, many times the word marriage also means they produced children, and that was expected of a marriage. Notice also the customs of the time, that engagements could have been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years before they actually knew their wife. So there's different customs that we're dealing with than our current customs. And it very well could be that if the sons of God were angels that were fallen and came down onto the daughters of men, that they took women among them and really didn't marry them. They just took them because of their wanton of pleasure. Now let's compare that with Noah chapter 6 again. "But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and a perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Okay, so the word generations here in the Hebrew is toldah, and is a descendant or family. Just as tashdik was lawful or righteous, just, the word is lawful or righteous. Perfect, the Hebrew word tamin, is moral, integrity, without blemish, complete, full, perfect, sincere. So could it be then, and this is one of the theological discussions, is that Noah did not have the blood of the Nephilim, did not have the blood of these fallen angels, for man had given into the spiritual creatures and allowed the women to have children of them. And I'm going to develop that thought in just a little bit. So Noah was perfect in his generations, meaning he had no bloodline of fallen angels. Genesis 3:15, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, thou shalt bruise its heel." So what does this mean? That Satan has seed? Because here it's describing then the seed of man and the seed of woman. Well, woman was the receiver of the seed. Woman had the egg, and then man had the seed which fertilized then the egg of the woman. She was the conceiver. And so she was the vessel, in other words. So here we have then a description of Satan's seed, because he was going to put then enmity between the seed of man and the seed of Satan. Deuteronomy 32. It sort of puts a different perspective then on this verse. "They provoked him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations provoked they him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came up newly up, whom your fathers feared not." So here we see a different perspective, that it could have been that the gods developed of old were really fallen angels. They were demons. They were then here to disrupt the plan of God. And in various cultures around the world, whether you go to Egypt, whether you go to Rome, whether you go to the Mayans, whether you go to the Chinese, the Indians are very interesting because they have so many beliefs in 30 million gods, is that really they were spirit creatures that had fallen. Now, just give you a taste. Let's go to a canonized book, which was the book of Enoch, of which there's much controversy. I'm not going to get into it. But anyway, in Enoch 7:10 it says, "Then they took wives, each choosing for himself, whom they began to approach, and with whom they cohabitated, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and dividing of roots and trees." So the archaeologists wonder, well, how did man all of a sudden appear and began with all of this knowledge of building and everything else? How did they gain such knowledge so quick? Okay, well, the book of Enoch sort of covers it. That these fallen creatures who had superior knowledge and power began to teach man sorcery, incantation, dividing of roots and trees, metallurgy, and also then pharmakeia. So now the big question is, well, wait a minute, hold on. Can angels even reproduce? Well, remember what I said. It's really not angels. It is cherubim, who in generality are called angels. And we know cherubims had power. So Exodus 33 says, "And I will send an angel before thee. I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Pezite, the Hittite, Jebusite." They had power. And could then these spiritual creatures leave the heavenly, come to earth, and every way, shape, or form be human? In other words, it is assumed that angels became human and had sexual relations with the daughters of men. But I want to propose another idea. That it was cherubims who had power and they didn't have to have sexual relations with women. They could do it as God did it. His power overshadowed Mary and she conceived. And she conceived, and Jesus Christ was born of the seed of woman, not of the seed of man. And so angels, or these cherubim, had the power to just overshadow through their power and create in woman then reproduction, and not necessarily had sex with them. Let's look at also in this genealogy. The Bible mentions many genealogies. What is the purpose? You say, well, we want to find out about the pure bloodline and Matthew and we got Luke and we got the Old Testament. But really is maybe these genealogies to show that they had not then encountered fallen angels or evil seed. Hallelujah. That Jesus then did not have the bloodline of Nephilim. Let me introduce another idea. I have to introduce, and like I said, I'm going to raise more questions than I am going to be answers. Disobedience to God. We know disobedience was great. Many tribes disobeyed. God had to choose Abraham in order to create a people after his name. So in Genesis 1:25 it says, "And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and everyone after its kind." So they all produced after their kind. And this is something we try to tell then the evolutionists, that really it's only reproducing after its kind, that there was no mixture. But we have another interesting verse in Leviticus 18. It says, "Neither shalt thou lie with any beast to defile thyself wherewith, neither shall any woman stand before a beast to lie thereunto. It is confusion." So maybe, as again, these fallen angels, these fallen beings became the gods of the people because they were more powerful, and they could have been giants and therefore more powerful over men, is that also through their power they then created a man that was mixed of other creatures, mixing then the kind after his kind. That maybe mythology is not so much mythology. That there was men mixed with animals of whether it be a bull, whether it be a horse. You know, if you look at my presentation on evolution, You will find out that Dr. Ivanov of Russia tried to implant the seed of man into a monkey, an ape. And then he tried to implant then the seed of monkey or ape into a woman. And this is history. And so he was trying to mix it. And I thought it was really funny that when he was in South Africa, that then Stalin called him to come back to Russia to do this experiment of trying to create an ape army. And he had 5 apes with him that he captured out of Africa. And he had named them all. 4 died in the transportation. And the ape that was left was named Tarzan. The Egyptians had similar myth. Horus the falcon, Anubis the mixture of a jackal, Sumri the crocodile, Seth the dog and the jackal. You will find that also in the Greek and Roman mythology was Pan. Pan was quite interesting. Ezekiel says that Satan, it says, the workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that was created. There was a creature of musical being. And here we had Pan, the mythical god, that was part goat and part man and played the flute. You got Hermes and Mercury and Apis, the Minotaur, and all of these mixtures were the demons playing with the DNA of man, since these creatures actually existed. Now, why could they exist, or maybe what was the reason? Well, we're dealing with a time of swords and arrows, and one was always trying to conquer another, and the Canaanites, they were always fighting all the time. Well, consider yourself one of these warring tribes, and you want advantage over your enemy. So what do as the king? You give your daughters onto these spiritual beings to create giants, to create Goliaths, to fight your battles so that you can win and conquer people. That they voluntarily gave these women over, that they would have these big creatures. Joshua 14 says something interesting. And the name of Hebron before Kerimbah, which was Arba, a great man among the Anakims. And the land had rest from war. That once Joshua conquered these giants, that God ordered the wiping out of these particular societies, that there was peace in the land. But when they started up again, there was wars and fighting in the land. Because these Nephilims, or these fallen creatures, were what? Out to destroy the work of God. Out to destroy peace. Out to destroy man and have man kill themselves so that more would go into hell. Other sources. The Dead Sea Scrolls. I name them here. There's actually a scroll that's named the Book of the Giants. So I named it. In this slide you'll see it's 4Q531. Now you got to realize that there was bits and pieces. But nonetheless, here's what they were able to derive. In the Book of the Giants, they defiled, ... They begot giants and monsters, ... Behold, all the earth was corrupted. So even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it notes that there was giants. Look again at the Antiquities of the Jews written by Josephus, a historian during the time of Jesus Christ. For many angels of God accompanied with women and begat sons that proved unjust, and despisers of all that was good on account of the confidence they had in their own strength. For tradition is that these men did what resembled the acts of those whom the Grecians call giants. Chapter 3, verse 1. So even the Grecians now are involved and knew that there were giants in the land. The book of Enoch, one more time, chapter 7. And the women conceived and brought forth giants, whose stature was each 300 cubits. Again, where do we get this? That would be somewhere around 51 feet tall. Chapter 15 of Enoch. Now the giants who have been born of spirit and of flesh shall be called upon the earth evil spirits. Evil spirits shall proceed from their flesh. So you see, again, we got this mixture, even in the book of Enoch, even though it's not a canonical book, but nonetheless, it's interesting even from a historical perspective. Were giants so rare? Now, there was people who had then thyroid conditions. Charles Bine was the Irish giant. He was over 8 foot tall. His parents were ordinary, not unusually tall. Of course, they state that he had a medical condition. Patrick Murphy was born in 1834. He was over 8 foot tall. In California, a 9-foot skeleton was found in some archaeological digs. Bob Wadlow was well over 8 foot tall. But here's an interesting note. In Patagonia, which is the southern end of South America, it is said in Wikipedia, it states, Patagonian giants are a mythical race of people that were from 12 to 15 feet tall. Well, that's quite interesting. But if you keep on reading the article, it quotes out of the captain's log of Ferdinand Magellan, the explorer, in 1520. Quote, one day we saw a naked man of great giant stature on the shore of the port, dancing, singing, and throwing dust on his head. He was so tall that we reached only to his waist. So if a typical man was 5.5 feet tall, that would make then this particular Patagonian giant 10, 11 feet tall. And by the way, in the Latin, pata refers to an animal, and pata means foot. So really what they were referring to was Bigfoot. In the 3rd century, around Rome, there was bones that discovered, and the size of then the leg bones that were discovered would make this particular person from 16 to 20 years old and up to 8 foot tall. Here in North America was the Mound Builder people. May 4th, 1912, issue New York Times. 18 skeletons found by the Peterson brothers on Lake Farm in southwest Wisconsin. So these then bones and skulls were anywhere from 7.5 feet to 10 feet tall. And the other interesting fact of this is that they found the head skulls had 2 rows of teeth, had 6 fingers and 6 toes, unlike the races of people that were around them. You could go to the museum at Atzlan State Park in Wisconsin, where they have on display the Princess Atzlan, so they called her. They believe she was from 20 to 25 years of age, and she measured over 8 foot tall. So that we do have these particular discoveries. Other archaeological evidence also found in Wisconsin was on December 20th, 1897. And so we have then other bones that were over 9 feet tall. In other parts of the world, in the Andara temple in Syria. Now here in front of the temple is an impression of a foot in front of the temple. And it's always stated that they carved it out of the rock. Really? Well, what if it wasn't carved out of the rock? What if some giant put his foot there? And in this particular slide you see there was the measurement of a foot that was 3 feet in length in 1300 BC, and could be seen there for a long, long time. So that would make a very tall man. Now, why can we say this? Well, because there's other questions in the area. And the other question is the Baalbek monoliths. So if you go there to this particular in the Bekaa Valley, you will find then carved monoliths, in other words, great foundation stones that were up to 200 tons. Now, if you look at this slide, you will see there the arrow points to a man. So that will give you some perspective as to how big this stone is. Obviously, it's broken at this point. But then you see there how big this stone is, and how did they carve them, and how did they move them? Maybe they needed giants to move them. Out of the hieroglyphs and the pictures in Egypt and many of the pyramids, as you will note that Pharaoh in these pictures that you will see here on this slide was much bigger than the servants. In 2 of them, and this is just 2 of many, many pictures that were found within the pyramids. So were these men pictured because they were great men of great reputation and power, or were they really twice as big as their servants? In the Great Pyramid of Giza, we also find this, like the Bekaa Valley, in that we know now that more or less it is estimated there's a little over 2.3 to 2.5 million outer stones of the pyramid. Some of the interior stones that were made of granite and marble are up to 20 to 40 tons carved out of one stone that were in the center of the pyramid. And then we now can estimate that if of this great pyramid was built within 20 years, within the life of the Pharaoh, and we know now we can do some division in math and divide it by 12 months and divide it by the 20 years and divide it by the day, that then we note that the smaller stones, which are 2.5 to 4 tons each, is that I know it's always pictured that the slaves were all carrying stones up there, being dragged by slaves and elephants and everything. They would have had to have placed the outer stones, these 2 million stones. They would have to place 5.5 stones every minute, a feat that we could not do today with machines, and be accurate to less than 1/4 of an inch. In Peru, there was many monolith or great stones. There I picture in this slide. Again, I picked a slide with a person so you would see how great the stones were, how they were laid. The stones are very close. You can't even put a knife between them. Even in Machu Picchu, at a height of 8,000 feet above sea level, is that there's this great city that was built there with 200 buildings, which were even built in such a manner that allowed for earthquake activity. And they terraced the mountain so they could grow food, all held up by stones. They had a water supply. They even had a stone known as the Ithahuatana stone, which then marked the winter solstice. So they even had astronomy and everything that was built upon this mountain. How did they get the stones up there? How did they build all this? They did not have the wheel, and we're talking about a culture today that deals with alpacas or llamas. Also down in Peru, we actually have a name for them. It's called the Lichocephalus skulls, or these elongated skulls. Now they're very different from human skulls, not just because they're long, but the human skull above has actually 3 pieces in the human skull, 3 parts of it, sort of like tectonic plates, you might say. And these particular skulls only had 2 adjoining pieces. We find the same type then of structure in Egypt as we do in then Peru and these areas of the Peruvian mountains. And the skulls that were examined and discovered were somewhere around, dated around 2500 BC, about the supposed time of the building of the pyramids. They were 24% larger than normal human, and according to archaeologists and evolutionists, the bigger the skull, the more brains you have, the smarter you are. And they found the same thing with Neanderthal man, that many of the skulls were larger than the normal human skull. Another thing that was interesting about these elongated skulls is they had 2 sets of molars. So what does all this mean? Man, did I bring up a lot of questions. Matthew 24, but as the days of Noah were, so also the coming of the Son of Man be. In other words, could it be that we're going to return right before Jesus Christ, that these demonic creatures will appear again and began to make wars upon the earth? As the days of Noah were, they were so bad that God had to create a flood in order to destroy them all. But he didn't destroy them all. We know the Nephilim came up at other times, again, even after the flood of Noah. More angels descended and then populated among the women of men. But this sure does give you a different perspective, doesn't it? Are the Nephilim then around today? Let me bring up the prophecies of Daniel and give you another perspective. And assuming that the Nephilim are active and were actually fallen angels that became demons and evil spirits. Dan chapter 2 verse 40. And the 4th kingdom shall be as iron. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall not mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Now here the seed, Chaldee word, means prosperity. But nonetheless, the prosperity of man, the descendant of man. Could it be then that Daniel, in speaking the iron mixed with the clay, is actually talking about demonic activity? that the demons again, the fallen angels again, will begin reproduce to create men of renown, great men. That they will cause destruction, disruption upon the earth. That they are the ones that are trying to guide and destroy people, that they would fight each other and create wars. In other words, opening the door for Jesus Christ to come one more time and bring peace upon the earth as he did with the great flood. The clay and the iron. Could this mixture of spirit and flesh really come about? 1 Timothy 4. Now the Spirit speak expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. That once again man is going to give heed. And we know in today that the devil is roaming the earth. There is much demonic activity, satanic activity upon the earth. And this is only prophetically speaking. 2 Peter chapter 2. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them in the chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the whole world, but saved Noah and the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow. In other words, one of the reasons that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah is not only because it is believed that they were homosexual or sodomites, that they had mixed their seed with fallen angels, with demons, with Nephilim, to use the original Hebrew word, and they were corrupt in their seed. And so God had to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Will this happen again in the last days? Where man seeking power and glory and trying to uplift himself and be greater than God again will allow himself to be mixed with the seed of fallen angels, the Nephilim, in order to conquer the world or have their little piece of conquering the world. Well, I guess it's still a theological debate. And like I said in the beginning, I bring more questions than I do answers. But I wanted to give you a different perspective of looking at prophecy and the last days. God bless you. I pray you enjoyed this. Contact me. Send me a message. Terrazasministries.com. T as in Texas. ERRAZAS Ministries.com. Look me up on YouTube. Search Oscar John Terrazas, and all my other presentations will come up. A couple of them, like I mentioned, are related to this. God bless you, and I pray that God be with you.